the first point I'd like to make in terms of taking us forward is that the panel believes that PUB should move towards a risk-based approach to flood risk management. And what we mean by this is that when arriving at appropriate design standards, PUB should take into account the impact or consequence of a flood event. That is, the extent of damage that might be caused by the flood, the disruption to the community and to people, and the economic impact. So, for example, a high-risk flood event might be due to a combination of relatively low impact but high frequency of occurrence, or alternatively, it may be due to a rare event which occurs over a large area and therefore there is a large impact. And so that in the future we would like to see PUB use drainage standards which reflect the damage and impact from flooding events. Secondly, we'd like to see PUB adopt comprehensively a dynamic modelling approach to assessing and developing the drainage systems in Singapore. This would involve the latest computer software to simulate the drainage system and the comprehensive collection of both performance data of flows and levels in that system and associated information on ground levels, topography and local land use. And what that would enable PUB to do is to simulate the effects of future rainstorm patterns on both the performance of the system and on flood risk. And that would allow them to deliver a number of beneficial outputs. Firstly, it will give them a much better understanding of the actual existing system performance. Secondly, it would help them to fully evaluate the potential of different possible interventions to deal with some of the challenges that we have to face. Thirdly, it would help to select the best options from those different interventions. And finally, it would allow for continuous improvement to the system over a longer period of time. So what might some of the options to flood mitigation look like? At arriving at this, the panels looked around the world at current best practice and in particularly some of the latest developments. And in doing this, it's looked at three areas of potential improvement. Firstly, amongst the areas from which the floodwater is actually generated in the first place. This we call the source of the flooding at the upper ends of our drainage areas. Secondly, along the pathways, that's the drainage conduits and paths over which the floodwater travels. And thirdly, the receptors. The receptors are those parts of our areas that impact from flooding. This could be property, transport links and other infrastructure. And we believe that a range of interventions should be delivered in all of those three areas. And I'd like to just give you some examples of what those might look like in the future. You'll bear with me while I move the mouse around. Okay. Firstly, we believe there's great opportunity in Singapore for retaining the rainwater where it falls within individual building developments, either on the roofs of buildings or in storage tanks and ponds at ground level. And we would like to see regulations brought into Singapore which would require all new developments to install source control measures so that the impact of development is mitigated. We also believe there's potential for retrofitting these measures to existing buildings and development. We also believe similar measures can be implemented along the roads and pathways of Singapore, particularly during new highway development. And this shows an example of a porous roadway from the USA. We believe that a great deal of the impact of conveying flood flows can be mitigated by putting more storage into our drainage systems. So installing storage tanks and storage ponds along the pathways of our drainage systems could help to reduce peak flows and remove flood risk. We also believe that there is a role for upgrading the conveyance capacity of some of our drainage conduits, but we do not see a wholesale upgrading of the capacity of the drainage infrastructure as being the best way forward. This will be expensive, but more importantly, it will be extremely difficult and disruptive to deliver within the dense urban area of Singapore. And we believe there are better methods for Singapore than that. And finally, within the areas that might be at risk from flooding themselves, we believe there are measures which are already being implemented and could be carried further. So the use of anti-flood barriers in areas that already exist, and we have some excellent examples of this already in Singapore. The use of raised thresholds, which again is part of some excellent current design standards in Singapore. And just as important, the identification of safe areas in which floodwater can accumulate during extreme events. And this shows an example from Scandinavia where a recreation area outside a school is used as a temporary flood storage area during flooding and extreme events. And by using the appropriate mix of measures at source, pathway and receptor, we believe we can better tackle flood risk in Singapore. But there are also other things which we'd like to see. We'd like to see better public engagement. We see the public and other stakeholders, businesses and commerce, as also playing an important role in helping to manage the damaging effects of flooding in this urban area. And as part of that improved engagement, we believe there's an opportunity through improved modelling and monitoring of weather patterns to generate better flood forecasting and provide better information to the community as a whole. And we see that as a very important step forward, as well as providing better physical infrastructure. And finally, we've alluded to some of the future challenges which Singapore will face. Singapore, like most major cities in the world, will have to cope with some of the mega global trends that will occur. Rising energy costs, climate change, extreme storms, extreme droughts, water scarcity and resource scarcity. And what we must not do is to set a pathway of introducing flood risk management measures which compromises our ability to respond to those future long-term challenges in Singapore. So we want to see solutions, for example, which avoid high energy costs. Solutions which can deliver multiple benefits. For example, source control methods which can improve local amenity, help reduce the urban heat island effect, and potentially provide an alternative source of water for use locally. And we also want solutions that can be phased in over a period of time so that they can be adapted to cope with future uncertainty. And overall, we believe that if we implement this mix of strategies, Singapore will be effectively able to tackle future flood risk. Thank you.